In a world of overly simplified tabletop role-playing games and preposterously complex games, there is one sleeper TTRPG that rises to say, I rest squarely in the middle, and it is Vagabond. Perhaps you haven't heard about this game. This is a game that I kickstarted and is written by Indestructo Boy and his cronies, you know, the guy that was basically Cap and the whistleblower for the whole OGL thing. But Vagabond is this game that I think sits squarely in between like old school sensibilities and rules like games like Shadowdark, but has a bit more complexity and doesn't quite reach levels of like D&D and Draw Steel and Daggerheart and all these other games. So maybe you've been interested in a more simplified gaming experience. You want something like a Shadowdark, but Shadowdark just doesn't quite have the punch that you're looking for, the complexity of rules, the abilities and things like that. Then this might be the game that you've been searching for. Vagabond. And I want to approach the overview of this book a little different than I have in the past, and I'm going to steal a little bit from the What is Tabletop guys and talk about 3 points: complexity, style, and layout. Because I know personally that things like layout tend to be more important to me than a lot of folks. And some folks really want to know about the complexity or the themes and styles and feel throughout the book. So that's the 3 things I'm going to score today as we take a look at Vagabond. As always, I must state things like this. This is a game I backed myself. I was not even sent a free copy. I was so excited, I kickstarted it. And I have not actually had a chance to play it. I've mostly been looking through the rules and reading it so I could bring the attention to folks like you. And speaking of cool games that are easy to run, ICRPG, but here's a twist. Today's sponsor is a game called Tales of Mythic Prehistory by Torn. This is something of a mix of like setting and player guide that I think is a really cool addition to a game like Index Card RPG. In both Heroes and Villains of a Mythic Age, you are gifted pre-gen characters with motivations, goals, and ways to shape them into their own story arcs. And the beauty of Mythic Prehistory is that nothing is carved in stone. These are stories that you and your players tell at the table. So go over to itch.io, I'll put a link in the description down below, and check out this awesome looking supplement for an already awesome and easy to run game. All right, that's it. Now back to the rest of the video. Okay, so some key points starting off. One of the things I want to focus in on right away is some of the layout and complexity choices. One thing I'm really starting to love to see in books is right in the front and back covers of the book are basically reference guides. This has things like our checks, favor and hinder, which is like our boons and banes, how actions work, moving, flanking, defending, what armor does, focusing, and dying. Then, of course, things like NPC reactions, morale checks, zones, which is really cool, and I'll touch on later, how casting spells work in this game. Then if you flip to the back, we have a lot of quick references for things like how to track time, distances, resting, equipment, what armor is, what weapon properties are, and the 17 statuses, which I think is a really simplified version. And as you can see, a lot of the text is quite concise, which gets a lot of points in my book. Everything is clearly headed, easy to read. There are large, bolded text for the things you need. Another thing I love to see is these kind of old school different color lines, which makes it easy to follow along when there are large lists, and is something I started noticing in games like Old School Essentials. It really does help my mind grasp everything that's here without kind of getting lost in long blocks of text. Oh, and of course, love to see a good use of a ribbon here, and the color is great, matches the rest of the theme of the book. So points for style. Here we immediately have our table of contents. We can see that this game has adventuring rules, encounters, exploration, downtime, hero creation. There are 7 ancestries and 18 classes in the core book. Then we have gear, spells, magic, relics, bestiary, quests, and appendices. Now there is a second book beyond the core rulebook which does add a ton more options and classes and things, but I didn't get it this time around and I'm really kicking myself for not getting it. We quickly move from the contents to the preamble, which talks about what this game is. It is a pulp fantasy game, what's familiar and strange about it, how to thwart villains, action first, cinema second, common sense is king, and order of operations. Then we move on to our touchstones, things like anime, manga, film, literature, music, video games, tabletop games, and TV series. There is a consistent feel, vibe, theme, whatever word you want to use throughout this book, and it's just amazing. I love the art. It makes me feel like I found this like some best kept secret Nintendo JRPG that everyone forgot about, and it just makes me really excited to play this game. Plus, this list does comprise of some of my favorite anime, video games, tabletop games, and TV series all right here. I mean, Princess Mononoke and Dark Souls, sign me up. We get a quick chapter about discretion and things like your session 0. Then we jump into the basics. You need all the dice you know. Dice explode. They're cumulative rolls. You do a countdown die for things like timers. There are D66 rolls and stats. Checks are really simple. You roll a D20. You try to beat the difficulty. You roll high. And you determine that difficulty by subtracting your score from 20. One thing that I think makes this game really simplistic, and I'm increasingly loving to see in games, is this idea that there are set DCs based on your stats. That way, the better you are at something, the easier it is to do. We still have all the familiar D&D things like crits, attacks, casting, and saves. Favor and hinder is a little different, but I really like it because it's basically my own homebrew rule of boons and banes. You can add or subtract a D6, and they cancel each other out. They don't stack. What about enemy checks and saves? Anything under the control of the GM does not roll for its checks and saves. They are assumed to pass unless the hero's check or save succeeds. We all love to see the familiar things like hit points and damage, and then of course whenever you hit 0, you are dead. We have armor, immunity, and weakness, which either subtracts damage from the attack, or you're unharmed by the damage, or it ignores armor and immunity and deals extra damage. We have a cool little adventuring overview talking about targeting and vision and things like that, as well as using a grid. This is clearly a game that cares about things like time, movement, and speed, as well as positioning and resting, so a lot of your typical adventure role-playing game stuff. Personally, I am a huge fan of progress clocks. In a way, most things in a game could be summed up as a progress clock, and I'm glad to see them here in the book. Our statuses are really simple and useful, and there's 17 of them. I'm going to skip a bit because a lot of this is GM stuff, but it's great stuff on encounters, running enemies, and I do want to zoom in on zones for a second because this is an interesting part of this game. Zones in Vagabond essentially dictate how a monster acts, whether they're a frontliner and they go in and hit, or they're a midliner, they do their thing and run away, or maybe they're a backliner and they sit back and shoot spells or lob arrows. I just thought this was a really cool bit of design, and we'll touch on it a bit later when we look at the bestiary. Exploration and crawling get broken down here, and we use things like progress clocks. Love to see that both travel and downtime have their own systems and procedures, but are pretty simple to run and reference at their core. Alright, let's get into everyone's favorite part of TTRPGs, hero creation. Now you can roll everything like most old school games if you want to simplify the process and get everything finished quickly. But there are plenty of options to choose from if your players prefer a more heroic modern roleplay experience. Here we have D8 ancestries, D66 classes. You can choose what array of stats you want or roll for it, and then we move on to things like gear, skills, and passives, and then what our different abilities are. We have 6 stats, though they shifted around a bit, and I actually really like the layout of these stats. Might, dexterity, awareness, reason, presence, and luck. Might covers things like your HP, which is really simplified. It's just your might times your level. So really easy to track. It covers inventory slots, which is the way to do it, folks. It covers things like melee and brawling, and each of these abilities have about 4 skills that are associated with them. We move on to Dex, which covers things like reflexes, finesse, and sneak checks. Awareness, which is used for reflex, detect, mysticism, and survival checks, as well as ranged attacks. Reason for will, arcana, craft, and medicine checks. Presence for will, influence, leadership, and performance checks. And luck for everything else. And I really like seeing the luck pool here. This is kind of like your meta currency. And then we have 3 saves, endure, reflex, and will, which are affected by the previous ability scores. And while I'm here, I just do want to touch on the style of the book because I really love this layout. It is so polished, looks really great. I love all the art. It feels thematic to the game. And it's really easy to pass through the different sections and look at things like heroes, gear, bestiary, and quests. Ancestries, of course, we see a lot of the classic staples like human, dwarf, elf, and halfling. Then we have a few extras like Draken, which are like these dragonborn, and of course, goblins and orcs. And this is maybe the coolest orc art I've ever seen in any book. I love it. Look at those cloven hooves. And this book definitely gets points for style. I am just loving this art through and through. It gives it a unique feel that I don't think any other game quite has. It combines old school feeling video games with things like anime and JRPGs. Alright, so let's take a look at these classes really fast. When you level up, your max HP increases, you get new and improved class features. On even levels, you increase a stat by 1 to a max of 7. On odd levels, after level 1, you gain 1 perk as shown on the class table. This game has different leveling methods, which I really love to see. You can basically do like a Blades in the Dark questionnaire. You can do Destiny, which is kind of similar to milestone progression, or different leveling paces, depending on the kind of campaign you want to run. There's even options for starting at level 0. Now, this is the real meat and potatoes of the book, the classes, and they are just so well set up. And again, the art and style and theme and vibes are just supreme throughout. But again, there are some extra cool things and little add-ons to this book that I think add some really nice character to it. Things like the complexity of the classes based on a 5-star chart. As you can see, Alchemist is one of the more complex classes in this game. It gives you some iconic alchemists as touchstones and reference points, and then tells you some of the basic actions and abilities and what playing an alchemist is going to be like. Here's a list of the class features and when you obtain them, as well as a quick description of those class features. This is probably one of the coolest barbarian arts I've seen in any TTRPG. I want to play this character with a giant meat cleaver of a weapon, berserk style. And I usually don't care for barbarian classes. This just looks so fun and instantly gives me ideas for characters to play. We have all of our staples like the Bard, but then some interesting ones like the Dancer. We've got a Druid, a Fighter, which I'm glad to see is a 1-star in complexity. This Gunslinger just looks sick and I want to play one. The Hunter, the Luminary, which I believe is basically our Priest class. The Magus, or the Spell Sword. A Merchant class, which is fun. The Pugilist, the Revelator, which is kind of like a Paladin or a Gish. A Rogue, Sorcerer, Vanguard, which I have to stop on to say this is some of the coolest art in the book. I mean, just look at that shield. A Witch, and of course, last but not least, the Wizard. Alright, I may have to keep moving a bit because the sun was making it hard to read, but here's our perks list, which is basically feats, if you're familiar with games like D&D and Pathfinder. And this is a really cool quick reference list, which is basically like an appendices for these perks specifically. Makes it really easy to keep track of things and find what you need at the table, which gets extra points for layout. And as I was saying, you can see that there's no shortage of options here. If you really want to make your character unique and specific, there are tons of ways to customize it, even beyond class and ancestry. Then we move on to one of my favorite parts of every fantasy TTRPG, which is gear. This talks about inventory and how each bit of inventory is individually tracked by a slot number, 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then we have starter packs, which is another thing that's growing in popularity, and I'm glad to see here. And all of your favorite staples are here. We have things like light, medium, and heavy armor, as well as different weapons, but I really love these weapon properties, so let's focus in on this for just a second. Because if you look over here, things like our battle axe have cleave, but you might want to get a great axe, which is brutal and cleave. What is brutal and cleave? Brutal means crits deal 1 extra damage die, and cleave can deal half damage to 2 targets. And most of the things will be somewhat familiar to you, like the number that the die swings whenever it uses it, but you may want to pay attention to some things, like our greatsword here, which actually deals a d10. Of course, we have our price list for things like alchemy and medicine, beasts and husbandry, astronomy and navigation, books and magic, containers and packs as well, which add slots. And plenty of things to reference like cooking and food and games and toys. And then we even have a section on alchemical items in case you really want to get into potion brewing with lots of cool abilities and concoctions. Then we move on to spells and we start seeing familiar things like lines, auras, cones, cubes, spheres, glyphs, and touch spells. But spells work in a really interesting way in this game, so I want to take a second and read how they're cast. When you cast a spell, you determine 1. Are you casting it to deal damage, cause the effect, or both? Choosing to only deal 1d6 damage or cause the effect requires no mana. Choosing to do both costs 1 mana. 2. Who the spell targets with its delivery. And 3. How long it lasts, known as duration. When to make cast checks. When you cast a spell, you don't make a cast check unless an unwilling being is a target. This is a really cool feature. It means you're not going to waste your spells for flavorful moments like lighting the fire with your fireball.
Damage. Spells with damage base can be cast to deal d6 damage. You can spend mana to increase the damage by 1d6 per mana spent to do so. Another cool modular way to use spells. Effect. The spell's effect describes what it subjects the target to, unless cast only to deal damage. Then we have delivery, cost, and increase. Then if you want to take a look, here are the different methods of delivering your spells like aura, cones, cubes, glyphs, imbue, line, remote, sphere, and touch. Then you can also spend mana to increase the duration, which is an extra bonus modular way to customize your own spells. I just thought this was a really different way to look at spells, and I really like it. I think it gives you a lot of versatility with your spells and lets you be more creative than just shoot or blast or use that ability over and over. We have things like trinkets and wands and a quick spell list. And here are our spells, which I'm glad to see that they're never more than like a paragraph each. Then we move on to relics, which are basically our magic items. Relic lore, whether or not they're bound or consumable, cursed relics, and crafting relics. We have lots of relic powers and values and things like that. Then we have a list of relic examples to choose from if you're not feeling creative or don't want to make up your own. And there are tons of those too. Okay, let's move on to one of my favorite things to see in a book, and that's the stat blocks. This really tells me what I'm going to be looking at as the game master. And there are a lot of familiar things here, of course, like threat level, which is basically like our CR, your hit dice or hit points, speed, but then we have our zones, which we mentioned before, and I'm going to read these more thoroughly this time. Like we have our frontliner, most effective offensively with melee reach of an opposing force, and try to end their turn within reach. If a being on an opposing force is not within their reach after the move, they rush to a target. Then we have things like our midliners, most effectively offensively within melee reach, but try to end their turn out of reach of the opposition's melee offenses. And of course the backline. These beings are most effective offensively within range distance of an opposing force. We have morale checks, which is very old school to me, but there's an option at the bottom that says the GM can just choose not to use morale. Things like number appearing, senses, and armor, status immunities, actions, recharges, multi-attacks, melee attacks, oversized weapons and abilities. A bit on NPCs and hirelings, threat levels, how to build encounters, and then even determining threat levels. And there's a great chart here to help you determine what those threat levels are based on actual numbers. Then just a huge list of ways to make varieties of different humanoids like apothecaries, acolytes, bandits, assassins, bards, and the list goes on. Cultists. We have our index for our bestiary, and it is quite a long list. Continued on the next 2 pages. Then we have something I'm seeing more and more of these days, which is basically pairing our different monsters and enemies in different styles of groupings, like artificials, beasts, cryptids. Here are our outers, primordials. And the art throughout is fantastic. I really love this style of art. It evokes a lot of old school feel to me, but with a mixture of brand new things. And there's really some unique designs and different takes on some familiar monsters. And of course we have all our staples like the gelatinous cube, undead, and of course vampires. This kind of talks about structures for things like adventures and hero paths, overviews, ways to do different hooks in a table of D66 hooks, preparation, travel, and crawling, rooms and keys, and aftermath. We've got random loot and then a few quests for us to start with in the back here. Only flip this page when you are ready to move on to the confrontation. Then we have our appendix for things like terminology, guidelines, solo, co-op, and compatibility, with conversions for things like BXD&D. That's pretty much it, folks. We've got our appendices and a character sheet in the back, which looks great. Very simple and easy to use and reference. Okay, well, I've reached the end of this trail, I guess, and so also the end of this video. But as I stated at the beginning, I want to rate this book in 3 different ways. Theme or style, complexity, and layout. Okay, as far as complexity, I'm going to give this 2 stars, or maybe even a 1.5 stars for complexity. 1 star being games like Maze Rats or Morkborg, and 5 stars being more of like your Draw Steel or Pathfinder First Edition. Just a lot of complexity going on. So the reason I think 1.5 to 2 stars is because even though the core rules are very simple, there's still a decent amount of, I'm going to call it crunch because there are lots of options, feats, classes, builds, and things like that. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy to sit at 2 stars with this game. Really easy to run for game masters, really simple to grok and understand, but still enough going on here that it's not just this really loose 1-star imagination game like Lasers and Feelings or something. Second category, and something I've recently discovered I guess I'm a snob about, is layout and design. And this book gets an absolute 5 stars from me. The layout and design is incredible. It's so easy to reference. I love the style of the headers and things. I love having the quick reference rules in the front and the back. I love the mini appendices at the parts of different chapters, like, your perks and your monsters and things like that. I think this is going to be so easy to read and use and reference. And I'm also sort of tying in like word complexity into layout and design as well, because I really do think that word count is a factor in what makes a game easy to run. And so this is part of that like 1 to 2 stars kind of feeling, that, or 1.5 to 2 that I was talking about, because I don't think it's very complex. And in fact, some of the terse or concise writing makes this a lot easier to use. So I think it really does bring that down to like a 1.5 on the scale of the complexity. But I know we're talking layout and design, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, it's just such an easy book to reference. I love having the different blocks so that I don't get lost in the text. And it really just is a beautiful book. Maybe like one of the best books on my bookshelf now as far as layout and design goes. Props to you and your team, because you guys killed this. I am a stickler for this kind of stuff, and I think this is a gorgeous book. I love the color choices, which we're kind of bleeding into theme and style now, but I'm going to get huge hate for this. But like, if you've looked at the physical printing of the Draw Steel book, like that is a 1 as far as layout and design to me. It just looks honestly really sterile. Just the layout and the design. Don't come at me. The game, the mechanics or whatever are very cool, interesting, very different and unique. But just the technicality of like layout and design on those books was not for me. It was like a miss in every possible way. Like the pages are blank white. There's a ton of extra blank spaces where it looks like art or something should have gone. The type font is so small, I can barely read it with my glasses on. This is honestly like, this is my 5 now. This book is the example of like what a 5-star layout and design is going to look like going forward. So you got to beat Vagabond if you're getting rated by this system in the future. Great book. So let's talk about category 3 then. As far as art, theme, and style, I would say like a 1 in this case is just like your reference guide. Like if you've ever seen the Mork board games on the easy to read print with none of the style to them, that's like a 1. This game also gets a 5 for style, theme, art, just the consistency throughout, the level of detail as far as like, using the color theme throughout the book. I mean, all the green and stuff. It's on the borders of the heroes and the different classes, which is, I'm calling it style, but it's also kind of like theme, right? Because this is a pulp fantasy role-playing game. And I think it really is those first 2 things very strongly. I think the characters feel very sword and sorcery heroic, but it's that pulpy heroic action mixed in with the hardcore sort of old school vibes that I like. And I mean, even everything from the cover, which this is an amazing cover and is going to stand out on your bookshelf, to like the art and the feel of the book throughout. Like I said many times already, it feels like some kind of classic JRPG video game, Final Fantasy kind of thing going on, mixed with fantasy things. Like there's still goblins and orcs in here, and they look great. The art is amazing. I'm really blown away by this book. I had high expectations when I kickstarted it, and they were still blown out of the water, which does not happen very often for me. It's great. This is one of the most beautiful books, TTRPGs, I now own. So yeah, there are my 3 ratings: 2 for complexity, 5 for style, and 5 for layout and design. I think this really just knocks it out of the park in all those departments. And again, that 2-star is actually kind of in its favor, because that means it's an easier to run game in this case, as far as like versus a more complex game like Draw Steel. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now, and that's it. Folks, if you don't believe that we are in the golden era of TTRPGs right now, I don't know what else to tell you, because it seems like every week there's a new awesome looking pulp fantasy action game coming out that I just can't wait to get to the table and try. And this week it's Vagabond. But yeah, play the games that you want to play. If this seems like something you and your table would like, go grab it. Obviously, this is my endorsement for it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect for every table. I'm definitely not one of those folks that says system doesn't matter, but I do think that this is a game that can strike that balance for your table if you want a rules-light experience, but still have a lot of options and interesting abilities and things like that to truly feel heroic. Okay, folks, make your own judgment call on whether or not this is the right game for your table, but I just wanted to showcase it here today because I feel like this is a game that might not get a ton of buzz, and I just think it's really great. It's really well done. It sits right in that place where if you're not happy, like I said, with games like Shadow Dark, because they're a little bit more, you know, roll and find out what you get, and you want a little bit more options for your players to choose from, I think Vagabond is an excellent choice. Put some links down in the doobly-doo where you can get a copy, and hopefully you guys check it out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if this is a game you backed or that you're now excited about. Right now, my mystery game is still in development. I have the core rules ready to go, and I'm playtesting the alpha state of the game, which you can get on board with if you choose to by joining the Discord or just following along on either Patreon or my email list. You can get updates. Please sign up for either my newsletter, which I will link below, or follow my link tree to Discord or Patreon, where I'm going to be doing updates about 7 Delving Sins. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for all your support. As always, learn, adapt, and grow. We'll see you next time.